Where problems entwine, the United Nations acts as a helpful sign. Like a soothing balm for nations' pain, the United Nations tries to remove their shackled chains. With its arms open, it lends a helping hand. The United Nations provides peace in the troubled lands. A very warm welcome to everyone. Today, I don't stand here only to oppose the motion that the United Nations is losing its relevance, but also I want to cement the faith in this international organization that has bestowed its fruits of peace and democracy to the entire world for so many years. But before moving on, I would like to set a base for my argument. I would like to remind all of you that time when you were passing out from your high school. Your teacher used to always advise you that you have to not get fulfilled by the luxuries of your house. You must regain the entire world and explore its reality. Same way, when India is passing out from its developing phase, it must not act as a stubborn child, where its demands of a permanent membership in the United Nations Security Council is not gaining some traction, and hence it is moving forward with the idea that the United Nations is losing relevance. I do understand the importance of the voice of a nation on a global platform, but at the same time, we cannot forget the contributions made by the United Nations in the past 10 years. And it is also acting as a tool for stability in various parts of the world that would have burned to hell without its help. People come here and quote 4 to 5 affluent instances like wars, failures in interventions, humanitarian aids. But if the mathematical reasoning is the sole judge, I have 95 positive examples that showcases that how United Nations has changed the course of world. The peaceful keeping forces in Libya, the intermediate forces in Congo, the missions in Sudan, humanitarian missions in Haiti, and many more. At least stability is being established in these regions which have not seen war, rather anything than war. The children are getting food to eat, and humanitarian values are brought upon in these nations. And the irony behind all of this is, my critics come here and state that the United Nations is only focusing on rich and developed nations, making all their arguments baseless. It has been rightly stated by the former United Nations Secretary. The United Nations has not been created to bring us to heaven, but to save us from hell. When Jews were being prosecuted in the Holocaust, in a pre-United Nations era, they were doing immigration into other nations. But what they faced was anti-Semitism, protests because of their identities, and some were even killed in that process. But today, in the United Nations era, when there is even a spark of Russia-Ukraine war, the United States opens up its borders for humanitarian parole for Ukrainian citizens. The Oxford University provides scholarship to Ukrainian refugees, and the world is bent over to voting in the United Nations, showcasing that the entire world has to become responsible for the international actions. Initially, it was not so important. But today, because of the traction of globalization, the United Nations acts as one of those tools which checks the international affairs as well as the promises kept by its members. India is a democratic nation, and recently, when its democratically elected Chief Minister of Delhi was arrested, the United Nations made a comment that India must conduct elections in a free and fair manner, showcasing that it is vigilant to the promises of its members. Today I'm making these arguments which are being noticed and analyzed because I'm speaking at a national stage. But if I would be making these same arguments from my house or social media, rarely some people would understand my viewpoint. Same happened with India in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Palestine is the sole definition of anti-India sentiment, and that's why the entire world understood that India is undoubtedly going to support Israel. But the statements made by our permanent representative to the United Nations created shockwaves in the entire international landscape. She rightly stated, and I quote, India's stance is to establish a sovereign, peaceful, and a viable land for Palestine that stands side by side to Israel. That's the pivotal role of United Nations, as it acts as an international platform where we can clear our viewpoints to the entire world. But no longer will be this platform used for international discussions. Because in 1971, when Qatar was introduced into the United Nations, it had opportunities to hold bilateral and trilateral talks with the Western world. At the same time, it learned the art of diplomacy, of handling both the sides, that is the eastern and the western parts of the world, due to which today it is being recognized as one of the preferred choices for the mediator of peace in the Middle East. And that's how the United Nations acts. List me one example that is not present in the United Nations and has a global impact. Taiwan is practically living under the shadows of the West. Vatican City is a religious state. And when was the last time you heard about Kosovo all these nations are not listed in the United Nations and hence do not have any impact on global affairs. Practically, that's the power of United Nations. So, can the United Nations be only limited to Security Assembly or General Assembly? What about WHO, which is a specialized organization in the United Nations? In the wake of pandemic, it was the first organization to address information about prevention and control of COVID-19 when it was having heavy pressure from China, a major political donor for it. And today's Red Alert system stands as one of those movements where the world collaborates to put actions and get upon their toes for fighting any epidemic or pandemic. But there would be many people who would criticize all these organizations. I would like to ask them to come on the stage and challenge the work and ambitions of UNICEF. That is an organization that is used for the protection of minorities and children. Its fabric is so pure that you cannot even find a single stain on it. And as all these organizations work on the three principles of P. The first P stands for peace, which is being maintained by the International Court of Justice and Security Council. The second P stands for preservation, that is being maintained by the climate wing of the United Nations. And the third P stands for protection, that is being committed by the UNESCO for protection of women and children. When the entire world was having a looming threat of ozone depletion, this was the same platform where countries gathered and collaborated for the abolishment of chlorofluorocarbons. And today also, through Sustainable Development Goals, 1.5 degrees Celsius mark, Paris Agreement, it is trying to establish itself as one of the leading organizations to eradicate the threats of climate change. But yet, my opposition would come and state that this is only a platform where there are debates and discussions. I would like to counter-argue them in the words of Winston Churchill. Jaw is better than war. Because at any time, discussions and debates are more preferable than physical wars. And the statement that there are only debates and discussions on this platform can be also debunked by the following statistics. 80 million people are being assisted by the United Nations World Food Programme. 68.1 million refugees are being assisted by the United Nations Refugee Council, and 45% of the children are receiving life-saving vaccines of malaria and diarrhea. Ladies and gentlemen, all of this just to give you a proof that the United Nations understand the gaps and divides of the society and is trying to act as one of the most up-to-date organizations in the entire world. But yet there would be some people who would remove the fault lines of this international organization. Today I've heard the Russia-Ukraine or the Israel-Palestine conflict so many times that it seems to me that the entire United Nations was made to solve these only two problems. I do understand that there are some faults, because it is a slow evolving system where the world has grown rapidly. But would you disown the entire election commission just because of a ruckus in Chandigarh mayoral election? Would you disown the entire Indian railways just because of few accidents? And would you disown the entire NATO alliance just because of a war in Ukraine? It seems hard to digest, right? Because it exposes the double standards of my critique. My opposition recently came and compared United Nations with a dog. And I would not like to defend it, because United Nations is a dog. When it barks, Russia in a state of war has to call the United Nations nuclear watchdog to have a check on its nuclear power plants. And it is as honest as a dog for its international law and charters towards each and every member. That's why today, one of the fastest growing economy in the world is striving and putting so much time and money to establish a seat in the Permanent Council of the security members. India, a nation of 1.3 billion people, the fifth largest economy and a huge exporter of intellectuals, is trying to gain a seat at this global table. So, if such a big nation is trying to gain a seat at the global table, the joke's on my critiques. Ladies and gentlemen, these were my arguments. Oh, my apologies. Facts for the relevance of United Nations. Thank you.